Hello, Patty. Thank you so much for being on the new mid.
You are so great to invite me. Thanks, Michelle.
I really enjoyed reading your book, Loving Large. It's such a powerful story. We as moms, the minute we give birth to our kids and they put the baby on our chest, we are forever changed. And these little souls come into our lives, and we have this huge, huge responsibility,
We sure do.
and we kind of become, a mom. And so your story is quite amazing and incredible. And I think a lot of moms will be able to relate to, sort of sacrificing yourself to do everything for your
Mhm.
child. But could you tell us a little bit about your story and what happened?
Sure. So I opened the book, Loving Large, with a prologue I called Becoming More Than Mom. So when my son came to me at 16 and said, and he was a bit of a complainer. So when he said to me, my knees are so sore, I can hardly walk up the stairs at school. And he complained the school had a million stairs, that old school, it came with a lot of other complaints. But when he said that he was having this pain in his knees, I was a little skeptical about it. I put that together, though, with a number of other things that had happened a few days later when we went to the doctor to check on the knees because he really was having a lot of painful stair climbing. And at the doctor's office, we not only diagnosed the pain in his knees as something called Osgood-Schlatter disease, which it's a growth-related disorder that is very common. It's literally what growing pains are diagnosed as. We went through testing. My very clever pediatrician saw some other symptoms that I raised when we were in the doctor's office that my son did not want to talk about. And he was diagnosed with a golf ball size tumor on his pituitary and gigantism. And the tumor is not the cause of the disease, but it is the key symptom of the disease. He was at the time, Aaron was just about 16 and he was 6'5". Um, Early projections put him at 7.5 feet tall if the tumor was allowed to continue to do what it was doing to his system.
Now, I can't imagine when a doctor says to you, now in your book, you say that the doctor calls you up and has you come
Yep.
alone without your son.
Right.
So I can't even imagine getting that phone call because I'm sure you didn't think, oh, this is not good.
Well, you don't, right. You
So,
don't think the pediatrician ever wants to see you without the kid. And I remember saying it to my husband at the time and saying, like, they want me to go in without the kid. Something's really, really wrong here. And he, being ever the calm part of the relationship, said, we can't overthink this. And I was like, no, we're really overthinking this. Because at the time we had done some testing because I knew where the doctor was pointing because someone had planted a seed in my mind, which I do describe in the book. I won't give away the cliffhangers, but someone had dropped the seed in my mind that he might have gigantism when they saw his facial features and heard about his extreme height. But extreme height in my family, extreme height wasn't 6'5". I mean, okay, I thought he would top out at 6'5", but it wasn't just his height that was going on. The headaches were happening. There were a number of other symptoms. And so my very, very savvy doctor had us test all of those areas, and a CT scan was done to see if there was something causing the headaches, which is what we told him. And in fact, it was the brain tumor, pressure on his optic nerve and pressure in his head that was causing the headaches. So when she called to have me come in, it was so that we could strategize how we were going to tell Aaron that he had the tumor.
now how do you do that as a mom? This is, I find it interesting actually. You were going through, you had a separation with your husband at
Mhm.
the time, and then
Yep.
you actually ended up getting divorced right when this was happening. So
Mhm.
you were facing this relatively alone, I
Yeah,
mean,
he was there, but I was the medical person, and I was also a full-time mom. I was running a business from home. I was building a writing career, but medical stuff was my bailiwick, and it was my part of our relationship. So we had one of those very functional relationships that you do your expertise, I do mine, and I was hands-on with this. I also had the time. But the week that the brain tumor was discovered was also the week that we told our children we were separating. And I can't imagine what the kids went through, but I'll tell you how you do it as a mother. You just do it. because you don't have a choice. If the option is letting your kid go through it alone, I don't know a mother that would allow that to happen. So I rose into the roles that he needed me to be in, and I didn't see that I had any choice. He didn't have any choice, so I didn't give myself one. And to the degree that my ex-husband could be involved, he was, but this was very much my favorite thing. I mean, medical stuff was my favorite thing. So I had already studied bereavement, I'd studied end of life, I'd written a book about cancer. So this was an area that we were both very comfortable with me taking the lead on. And I did very much take the lead, and he did. And we see throughout the book I write about, we came to a point where he would say, just tell me exactly what you want me to do. And we had another son. So we were busy
Yes.
trying to keep the family running, even though we were going through a separation, because we were committed to keeping the family running. And then we had an illness sort of invade us as the fifth family member.
Well, how, let's back up for just a second. How did you tell Aaron? And then how did you tell Justin? I mean,
Yeah,
I can't even imagine because, as moms, we have intuition and we have guts. So I'm sure, like you said, as soon as you heard the doctor say, "Hey, I want to see you alone." But even before
I
then,
knew.
when the tests that she was having you take, you
Yeah,
probably knew. And I'm sure you
I
were
did.
replaying some of the things in your head, like, wait a minute, this
Sure.
didn't make sure.
I also went home and did that Google thing.
Uh,
And
Dr.
it was
Google.
Dr. Google, and it was right. And I applaud the fact that Google was able to support me moving toward a rare, uber rare diagnosis when I wouldn't have been able to find a doctor that could have helped me at the time. So Google was my friend, and I was really thankful that as a writer, a nonfiction writer, as a researcher, I knew how to do this. I also was so comfortable around illness because of other work I'd done, that I didn't get alarmed right away. So it gave me the distance to do things that I might have otherwise been emotionally paralyzed by. I say that now, Michelle, but I didn't know then. I mean, how did I tell him? There's a long scene in the book where I roll up to school to pick him up, and I'm trying to make notes, in my notebook, but I'm looking up in the rearview mirror because I know I'm going to see him step out of his school. He does. He steps out of his school like it's any other day. Yeah, he'd had some blood work done. He'd had a CT scan a week before, but I didn't share with him that I was going to see the doctor. I kept as much from him at that moment until I knew what we were dealing with. And when I told him, he exploded
Wow.
and and told me he knew it. He said
Really?
he exploded. The scene is really painful and dramatic, and I relive it almost every day still. And he said, I knew it. I knew it. I knew there was something in my head. And that was possibly the worst of all, was that even he was fearful that there was something really wrong with him, and in fact there was.
And so, as a mom, what do you do? And like you've said before, you have another son,
Yeah.
so how did you best handle that? And
you
what
you
would you,
flop you flop around like a beached whale. I mean, you make mistakes and you fall on your face. And I tried to not reveal too much to my younger son because I didn't want to violate my older son's privacy. And this has become a dynamic that I still manage. And they're middle adulthood. They're in their 20s now. But it was, don't want to alarm one child, but I didn't want Aaron to not know what he was facing. So very early on, Aaron being extremely vocal, and which ended up being a good thing, that we encouraged the kids to widely express themselves in whatever way they wanted. That was a mainstay in our home. So really early on, he made it very clear how he wanted me to deal with it. He wanted me to handle the knowledge. He was 16 years old. He wanted me to handle the knowledge and give it to him in bite-sized pieces when he asked. So after I did tell him that they had found the tumor, I waited for the questions. This wasn't a skill that I had. I don't want it to ever come off that I knew what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. All I did was react to reading my kid's face, reading his body language, and reading his pain. And I made damn sure that I was everything he needed me to be if it was going to be time. If he was going to have a question, I was going to be able to answer it. And if I couldn't, I did what I did best. I promised him I'd find a person that would answer the question, so that he wasn't afraid to live in his own body thinking there was nothing could be done for him.
well, what's so interesting is you also say in Loving Large is that every parent's story is like solo voyage, but
Yeah.
you're never alone in feeling lost. Because I'm sure there's
Yeah.
a lot of parents out there. I mean, wasn't he given, only X amount of years to live at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very dire prognosis. So, although they gave me the prognosis, they also immediately said to me, we can't know because there have been so few kids with this disease. And although gigantism is the pre-puberty version of a disease known as acromegaly in adults, and although more is known about acromegaly, it has a very different dynamic. It doesn't have the physical growth, the height structure. It doesn't have that implication because it hits people post-puberty. So, with 200 or 300 people, kids in the world at the maximum at any given time living with gigantism, no one could put a projection on this for me. And even if they could have, my son's numbers, as in his endocrine values, were so unique that it wouldn't have been comparable to anyone else. So although they said in general terms that it has a shortened life expectancy, I didn't know what that number was. Now, a very brave doctor did give me one, and Aaron in the book does challenge me and say, do you know how long I'm going to live? But I also knew, and I said, I know what they say. And he said, fine, I don't want to know. But he could have done the research for himself at any time. But here's the thing about life expectancy is no one really knows, do they? And we had only started our medical journey when they gave me the dire prognosis. So every time we did something, we did surgery, we did radiation, we did medical therapy, meaning drug treatment. And every time something was done that was successful, of course, all bets were off about life expectancy. And it isn't the disease that was going to cause a shortened lifespan. It was the comorbidities. It was the ancillary things. Extreme height puts pressure on organs that weren't prepared for that height, etc. But genetically, one of the lucky points for him was he was supposed to be tall. So tall men in my family, tall genes. He was already projected to be 6'6", which is conversely and ironically why I never spotted that this was going on with him, because I wasn't surprised to see my 16-year-old 6'5" when I knew his ultimate height was projected at 6'6". His brother was going to be 6'3", and in fact, his brother is 6'3". So we rely on those things, don't we, as moms? And I think if my book's about anything, it's about what we do when we're surprised, what we do when a grenade goes off.
Well,
And you've got to be what your son needs.
well, what's interesting about that is you pushed everyone away,
Yeah,
and you did not let people who were wanting to help you in.
right.
So if you could give someone advice who's kind of going through a similar situation,
Yeah.
what would you say that you learned from that?
Well, I became an island, not to overuse the sailing metaphor. Um, I didn't let anyone close to me support me. I didn't trust anyone else to do what I was doing, and I didn't think it was anyone else's job. It's also how I'm wired, sadly, was that if I was going to go down, if I was going to be in this really ugly place, and I was going to hide it from everyone. I became very practiced at hiding it from the children. I slipped into a depressive episode for months when I heard that Aaron couldn't be cured. The treatment is a large part of the first half of the book, which is sort of the part where I'm, feverishly putting my paddle in the water, trying to sail us through rough seas. And then we hear, he's not going to be cured. And I think to myself, of course he's going to be cured. I'm going to work this hard. My kid deserves this. I'm working my ass off at this. And accepting that wasn't in the cards for me. But it also meant learning how you can live with, as thousands of families, something like 40,000 families at any given time are receiving bad news like this. And we learn to live with what we're handed. So people with chronic and critical illness live this way all the time. So we learned it too. What you think you can't manage becomes your new normal, and you move forward. And that's how we've done it.
Well, there's also mother's guilt. Like you were saying, your sons were large, Justin
Yep.
is 16. He was
Yep.
6'5" you were just thinking, oh, he's going to be a great basketball player. Or,
I wish he was American. He'd play basketball.
Oh,
And
that's right.
yeah. And that would be that was how we laughed off their height. I mean, they were big boys and they were powerful hockey players, but the extreme height has these effects on your body that no one wants. And that was, we weren't ready to swallow that. A mother's guilt. Yeah. Mother's guilt stole years of my life. I really believed I should be able to fix this for him. And then it took 5 or 6, maybe 8 years to realize that it was as fixed as it could be, because as I say in the book, I have a mantra every morning. I say it to myself, he's still here. He's still here. And there's no greater fix than that. And he has, he has a high quality life. He's already 27. He's right around 6'11", but he didn't grow and hasn't grown to 7'4". So his body is only dealing with the impacts of some height. Medical treatment has been very successful for him. He's done all the things that he thought he would and could do. And he lives a life exactly the way he wants to. He's even a little bit brazen about it sometimes, but he's a big man. And the guilt, that's for me to handle. I never wanted that to be his problem. Did I feel like I could have done more? Always. And that's on me. No one asked me to bear responsibility for this. I just did because I was his mom.
Well, how are you working through that? Have you forgiven yourself? I mean, look, he's still around. He's obviously, you just said the medical treatment has worked, and
Yeah.
that was your hard work. I'm sure many doctors, many appointments, many, treatments. That can't be easy.
Yeah, I think I stopped believing it was on me, and I started realizing that we were in it together, but I never wanted it to be on him. So somewhere in there is the answer. And the answer is we never let ourselves off the hook as moms. But he runs the show now. He decides what treatment he wants and what treatment he doesn't want. I'd still say that we do it together to the extent that you can. I'm still as involved as he wants me to be, because we're a team. And that was the wonderful thing about all of this. And there's so much positive and there's so much funny in the book. And that's that we have the most unique mother-son relationship of anyone I know, because I stopped having to be that mom that was distanced and disciplinary, and I turned into a full-fledged goofball. And he met me halfway. So we became sidekicks, and we still are. So we, send each other ridiculous videos. We have very dark humor in the book. We are also in love with little kids who were sick at hospitals where there are sick kids. So we found our own language. We found our own dynamic. We pulled his brother Justin in with us. We are a raucous trio when we get going, and his dad when his dad is with us, because of course we did separate and divorce during that time as well. But my family just morphed into 2 pods of 3, and sometimes still 4. And the disease didn't do that for us. That was something we decided our family was going to survive and do that way. What the disease did for us was give us something else to gel around.
Well, I love that you used humor and that
Oh
you
yeah.
sort of found your own way. Now, how long did it take you to get to that point? Because, early in the book, I love that scene where you're with a specialist and the specialist says to your son, this is early, early on,
Yeah.
look, your heart is not going to let you down. And neither is your mother, neither is the woman who's sitting here. She is going to get
Yeah.
you through this. And that it seemed to be a light bulb moment for Aaron.
Yeah, I didn't realize that had stuck with him. There's a spoiler alert here that at the end of my book, there's a letter from Aaron to readers, a letter to publishers at the time we were circulating this. And I didn't realize that he not credited me, but that he did look to me to carry the ball as much as he in fact did. I knew he wanted me to carry the information. And I guess I oversimplified it for myself because I didn't want him to feel he couldn't handle this himself. But in fact, that's what he took from that was, I'm going to get you there. A promise is a promise was our mantra. And I only did, in my mind, what every single mom would do. I had one skill, and that was I love information. I can write it, I can read it. Information was my zone of genius, and I stepped into that. And if I have any advice for anyone else, and I have met thousands of rare disease moms, and more that send me notes and say, what should I do? It's always number one. It's find out absolutely everything you can, and you decide the information that your child is ready to hear, asks to hear, wants to hear, because the rate at which they absorb information has to be personal, regardless of the age of the person. I say that about anyone dealing as a caregiver.
Well, what's interesting is there's a lot of talk about self-care,
Mhm.
and especially during this COVID-19 and having been quarantined and the world seems upside down, there's not much
Yeah.
uncertainty. So when you got this diagnosis, your world was
Yeah.
completely turned upside down. How how
Yeah.
how did you handle it? Did you do any self-care? If there are moms out there listening to this who their son might have autism or, cancer or something else, what would you say to them?
Well, this is one of those don't do as I do situations. I didn't self care. I isolated myself. I destroyed my relationship with my sister, with my best friend, with I didn't destroy it with my ex husband, but I didn't feel I could lean on him when we were divorcing. I couldn't have it both ways. I couldn't divorce him and then ask him to be, my support. And self care went out the window. um, I was a mess, and I was exhausted, and I didn't sleep, and I wrote into the night, and I did research ad nauseum, and I still ran ragged as a full-time mom of two young teens who still were living their lives as normal, and we were going back and forth an hour and a half each way in the car to go to the major hospitals in central Canada, in Toronto, where I live, and self-care went out the window. It's never returned. So that's my journey now. And those who will read the book will see that at the end of the book, my sons are the teachers, and they're the ones that say, like, woman, like, you got to get a life now. And I don't know how. So that's the midlife for me, is the where do I go next, which is the next book I'll write.
Well, what's interesting, I love that. I love that your sons are the ones that are like, okay, mom, because your identity gets wrapped up into that, right? Your
Sure.
identity just becomes like, I am my son's caregiver. I am his champion. I'm going to do all the research. We're going to hit all the hospitals.
Yep.
Well, now he's at a state where he can regulate himself, right? You said he's 27.
Right. Yep. He is.
So now
You know,
what is Patty? What is your identity?
well, first of all, letting him know he doesn't do as good a job as I would do.
Of course not.
So, which I do, which is our constant banter. It's like, are you thinking about this? No, mom, I am not thinking about this. And I loved letting go. I have to admit, I loved letting go. I was so thrilled to not be on duty anymore. I didn't know what that meant I was going to do with the rest of my time. So I started writing other books and working with other people on their books. But the where to next for me is acknowledging where I've been. So even though I wrote the book, and even though I've written a great deal about my experience, what I haven't done is take a look at what happened to me in the last 10 years. But my sons watched what happened to me in the last 10 years. I didn't process my divorce. I didn't process the grief of losing both of my parents. I didn't process the destruction I was causing around me. I found it impossible to stay in a relationship. I found it impossible to pursue a career in the way that I had before. That has served me well, that I go from book project to book project, and that I've ended up making a lifestyle out of it. But when you think that one phone call can change the trajectory of your life, you live differently. And I have lived that way for 11 years now, and I don't know how to change that. It makes fear your constant partner. I have this image of me patrolling the perimeter of not just my kids' lives, but the lives of the people that I love and that I work with, because some part of me believes that danger will come. And that is now so deeply embedded in me, because the surprise of all surprises hit my life, that's something I need to combat in order to move forward. Fear isn't a healthy lifestyle. And it very much became my lifestyle for the last decade. That's something I would love for other parents to not repeat, the people I call rare moms and warrior dads of kids with chronic and critical illness. But every mother, father, and caregiver I've met of a child dealing with critical, chronic, or any other illness, that's how they live. There's a huge sector of the population that live fearful because the one thing that some people get to take for granted, some people dare to take for granted their child's health, their own health, their longevity, their legacy. I don't do that. And I haven't for so long that I can't remember what it was like to live believing that nothing bad would happen to my children. So am I a worrier? Absolutely. Do I have more anxiety than other people? Yes, I always will. What I try to do is see that anxiety, that caution that became so big a part of who I am, also got doctors when he needed them, also saw symptoms coming, also noticed when medication wasn't doing what it needed to do, when he was, not dealing well with dairy products, when he was having a rash because he was reacting to medication. It also spotted those things. So sometimes it can serve us. But fear isn't a lifestyle. Unfortunately, it's a place where parents of sick kids live.
What's amazing, though, and incredible, and I'm really excited for you, is you survived.
Yep.
You have the knowledge to know that you can get through whatever is put in front of
Right.
you. Because if you can survive this, it's, sort of exciting. And you have a wonderful career as
Right. I
a
sure
as a
do.
writer. You do.
Hmm.
So, you write for other people. You're a ghost writer. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I get to build stories with people. And a lot of that is when people come to me and they're ready to write their book, whether they're a coach, a transformational leader, someone with a business, someone with a powerful life story, and they want to share it. They come to me with that. Now, sometimes I end up helping them write their book. A lot of the time, I just help them pull the story out of themselves and get it into a structure that's saleable. Lots of people go on to self-publish. Many of my clients go on to publish with the big 5 publishers, but that's become my life. Meanwhile, I was writing books of my own. I write a book with someone else now once every 2 or 3 years. I'm doing less of it now that I'm writing more of my own, but I was always writing. Writing was always my way to sort things out. And it's going to have to be my way to sort things out in future. Hopefully, I don't try to hide behind other people's stories a whole lot longer, because I have a sequel of sorts to write about what happens after 10 years of living in fear, right? And I think if I don't do that, my kids might have something to say.
I'm sure they do. I'm
Oh
sure
yeah.
they do. Well, Patty, I always ask my guests these two
Yeah.
last questions.
Okay.
So, what advice would you give your younger self, your 20-year-old self?
You're stronger than you think. I rarely use the expression strength, but it encapsulates a lot of things. For me, it's courage. I'm more courageous than I believed, but it has to be about something I care about. I don't know that I would do for myself what I would do for my kids or someone I loved. That's how I'm wired. But courage lives within us as an untapped resource. And it's there to the degree that we all need it when we need it.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And my last question is, if someone is having a hard time being motivated and getting started doing something in their life,
Yep.
what would you suggest to them how to get started?
I often think about how I started writing, and I made it as low risk as possible. I always ask myself, what do I have to lose? And that's a question I suggest to others who are having a hard time getting motivated is, what have you got to lose? And the other side of that, how much regret will you have if you don't just give it a try? And those things somehow get us to edge forward, pull back, just enough that we have cautious optimism. And if we can put our toe in the water, we will very quickly see whether or not it's something that we should be doing, could be doing, will be doing in the years to come. So somewhere between those two questions is what I would suggest.
Well, you know what I love about that is because, we are sort of in our second half. We're not sort of, we're in our second
We
half
are.
now.
Yeah.
There's a little less sand in our hourglass.
It's a
So,
terrible truth.
So you're right. What do we have to lose? I
Yeah, and
mean,
the answer is nothing. But realize too, and let me say this to the people listening, is I'm still learning this myself. Like, don't believe that because I've tried a bunch of things and I'm 53 years old, I've got any of this sorted out. I'm still terrified to try new things, but I've tried enough new things that I built a whole new life for myself with all these new things.
that is exciting. And I'm so excited for you now that Aaron is, taking care of himself, and wanting you to expand and Justin as well. They're
Yeah.
like, come on, mom, you
Yeah.
know.
Go, they say it a little more, but not as tastefully as you do. It sounds a lot more like, seriously, woman, like you think we can't take care of the cat? We can take care of the cat. Get out and get a life, which I think I was in the process of doing until this thing called COVID-19 hit.
Right. Yes.
But
Well,
that's
we're
the
all sort
excuse
of.
I'm using right now, Michelle. I'm using the excuse of, oh, I can't go do those things because of COVID. But I have some learning to do around trying new things, just like your question that you asked for your listeners. It's beneficial, isn't it, to have some kind of wisdom to go to when we don't want to try new things, when we're feeling stuck with motivation.
Oh, well, this has been such a great time. Thank you, Patty,
Thank
so
you.
much. And how can someone get a hold of you if they wanted to write their story?
Super easy. Patty with an M in it. Patty M Hall. So pattymhall.com on social media. And I help a lot of people write their stories, but I can almost always point them to a place to get started. I love that. I love hearing from people that have a story to tell.
Oh, that's great. And I'll have everything in the notes, the show notes too.
You're
So
so
that'll be
good. Thank
good.
you.
Well, thank you for being here.
An absolute pleasure.